Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Well, welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear and the story of the mod movement as seen through the life of one of the key figures, Peter Meaden, a.k.a. King Mod, the man who had such an influence on Andrew Loog Oldham and also obviously on the Stones, and also managed the Who in the early days and shaped their sound and shaped the way they looked and turned them into mod figureheads. It's a fantastic tale contained in this book by Steve Turner. Steve, it's lovely to see you again.
Good to see
How
you.
are you doing?
Doing well, yeah.
Good. So you talk about buying a pair of Levi 501s, I think it is, in Carnaby Street in 1963. So are you old enough to have been a mod? Were you actually a mod at the time?
It was actually 65, but...
65, sorry, yeah.
I think you kind of feel you're a mod if you've got the right attire. So as soon as I got Levi jeans, I was a mod, or held my hair in a certain way. But I certainly wasn't a mod in the sense that Pete Meaden was. I mean, Peter Meaden sort of saw it as a religion, and he was like a devotee, and he did everything mods should do, especially like staying up all night Fridays and Saturdays every weekend. That was his life. And taking these Drinamil tablets, he thought that was the release he was looking for, and made everything wonderful.
Well, look, tell us about how he got into the music business and the fashion business and the PR world and all that. Where did he come from and how did he get there? And tell us about him meeting up with Andrew Oldham as well.
Well, he grew up in Edmonton, and then then they went out of London for a bit before coming back with his family. And he met a guy called Ian Sinclair, who was a brother of Clive Sinclair, the inventor, who introduced him to Hampstead life. And it was through Hampstead life that he met Andrew Oldham, maybe at the Everyman Theatre in Hampstead. And Andrew was about 2 years younger than him. When you're in your early 20s, that's sort of quite an age gap. And it was really Andrew looking up to Peter, who had all these wonderful ideas. And they formed this company called Image and tried to find clients to promote.
And they were designers and PRs, weren't they?
They were kind of kids, weren't they? They were kids. They were chancers, weren't they? It's extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew particularly, I mean, he used to doorstep people and, he'd go to the doors of some, like Shirley Bassey or somebody who got a record just come out and say, do you need any help? He was doing that. I don't think Peter was that gregarious.
But they did PR for Bob Dylan's first tour, didn't they?
Well, it was when he came over to do, was it called Castle on Mad Street or Mad on Castle Street or something?
Whatever.
It was during that period that he somehow for a week got some money to do something with Dylan. I think Andrew said they got like one story out of it or something, but.
Right. But so Peter was kind of classic suburban kid, wasn't he? Is that fair to say? I mean, and mod was a kind of suburban thing, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, he was. He's one of those sort of bright, like Bowie, I think. Like a sort of bright grammar school kid who couldn't really tolerate the work, and probably was always looking out the classroom window. And so you can see that and John Lennon would be another case. The school reports are very similar. Like he's got it in him, but he's not applying.
Yes, if he applied himself. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So he was reading, James Bond strip cartoon and Mickey Spillane and stuff like that. He was like really excited about American pop culture. And then when he got in with the Hampstead set, it was French films and Italian films and stuff like that. And of course, mod was a sort of mix of all these influences.
Right.
And I suppose his conversions experiences were really discovering Drinamil, because he was working in an advertising agency and couldn't cope with the work, went to his doctor, and his doctor said, take these Drinamil tablets. This is
As
before
they did in those days.
This is, I think, 1960 or 61. So that was one conversion experience. The other one was, I think, in about 63, he discovers a scene club in Ham Yard, close to Piccadilly, Windmill Street. And that's where he discovers the music. Before that, I think the mod thing had been restricted to clothing and to the tablets, but then the music became the other dimension.
Right.
It's interesting. You read the first sort of accounts of mods or modernists. It's often not really tied to, certainly not to drugs, but more to clothes and music.
Yes,
and it was like
it is. It's very interesting the way you describe all this, and you go into the background. So modernist. It was, first of all, they were called modernists, as you say. And that was, is it Angus McGill or whatever on the Evening Standard is the first person?
Yeah. He seemed to have had his finger on the pulse. And because he was the guy that did this Town magazine story, and I think 1962, which had Mark Feld, soon to become Mark
Bolan.
And I think they were sort of calling themselves individualists or stylists, but it was clearly mod without the name mod.
And so these would be young chaps who kind of had jobs in offices or hotels or whatever, who just dressed in a way that was really distinctive and was not like anybody in post-war London.
Yeah, it seemed to be like really subtle, it's to do with trouser width and how many vents you had in your jacket or pocket flaps and things like that. So you could work in a bank and be a mod and you wouldn't appear outrageous in any way, but because, your hair's cut in a certain way and parted in a certain way, and a fellow mod would immediately know, that's a mod.
Yeah.
So it was quite an ingenious way. And I wondered, I think since I wrote the book, I wondered whether this came through the fact that the Flamingo Club in Wardour Street, which was promoting modern jazz, hence mods, they required a jacket and tie.
Yes.
And the Lyceum in Covent Garden, that also a rule that you had to wear suits or jackets or ties or whatever.
Because the early music associated with it was jazz, really, wasn't it? Before.
Yeah, modern jazz. Yeah.
What was the next music beyond that then?
Well, I think it became
R&B,
soul, like Sue Records and stuff like that, and what they were calling R&B at the time. That was and then of course Motown.
And what was his influence on Andrew Oldham? I mean, they met, and he clearly had an enormous effect on him. It changed the way he saw the world to some extent, certainly the way he dressed.
Yeah, I think Andrew was a sort of acolyte of Peter's at the time, and then the roles reversed once Andrew discovered the Stones, which happened while Peter was off in Spain doing nothing much at all, sort of enjoying himself. And he came back to London only to find that Andrew had discovered this group, signed this group, and they had a single out. And of course, Andrew said about the Stones, on the back of one of the albums, it says they're not so much music, they're a way of life. And I think that's what sort of captured Peter's imagination, like a band could become a way of life. It could be promotion for a certain sort of elite. And that's, of course, what he did with the Mods and the Who.
All right. Now, a lot of this is inspired by, this book is inspired by, and a lot of it is down to an interview you did with Peter Meaden.
Yeah.
When in the 70s?
Yeah, that was, I think it was 75. I was, at the time, there seemed to be a lot of press receptions and parties in Ronnie Scott's club, and I was at one of these, and a guy got talking to me, and he worked for Essex Music, and he said, "We're doing this deluxe songbook for the Who. It was called A Decade of the Who, and would you like to write the text?" And I said, "Of course, yeah, fine." So the way they wanted it done was it would be split up into different stories about the Who, not a kind of running narrative. So we're trying to look at these different aspects of the Who. And I had in the back of my mind that they had been managed or publicised by this guy called Peter Meaden. So I thought I'd track him down. I didn't know how to. I managed to get through to him by finding out who the publishers were for I Am the Face, which is the first song.
First Who,
for the high notes, who became the Who. I got a response, like a phone number to call. I called this number and somebody answered, and I said, "It's Peter Meaden there." They said, "Oh, I think he's on M1." And I thought, am I calling a service station or something? Did he become a labourer? And it turned out it was like a mental institution up in North London. I don't know what the appropriate word is these days, but that's where he was. And that's where I did the first interview. I went up to see him in his room in this hospital. He'd had an episode where he'd gone crazy and sort of thrown paint around somebody's room, but they allowed me to go in and interview him. And then a few days later, he came to my flat in the West End, and we did the second interview. And it went far beyond what I needed for my book, which was like a couple of pages or something. And it was just the way he, not just what he said, but the way he said what he said, that sort of captured my imagination. And the reason for doing the book really was I just thought it was a valuable piece of history, like this person that was quite prominent in this very influential movement was telling me his story and telling it in such a way, a bit like Neil Cassidy and On the Road. He just had this way of talking that sort of was integral to what he was actually talking about.
That's a very good comparison, actually. But it's I mean, he was very burnt out by the experience, as you were saying, but it's incredibly intense, that early section. Just tell us about the relationship with The Who, because, again, rather in the shadow of Oldham finding the Stones, he finds the high numbers, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then completely reshapes the clothes they ought to wear, because he realised that the mod movement had no figureheads. Wasn't that right?
Yeah.
How did he go about that?
I get confused myself at times, but they were called The Who. Then he calls them the
Detours,
and then they revert back to The Who. So he discovers this group in Shepherd's Bush, and he hears through his hairdresser. His hairdresser's doing the hair for these couple of promoter guys in West London who've got this band. They don't know anything about music. One of them sells doorknobs, but he tries his hand at music and has this group and doesn't really know what to do with them. And Peter thinks, maybe they could be the group that could be the front people for this movement that I'm so in love with, the mod movement. And so he goes to see them in Shepherd's Bush and meets them. And he thinks if he gave them the right music and he got to know the mods and he dressed them in the right way, that they would be the kind of figureheads for the mod movement. And Guy Stevens,
they were happy to go along with, weren't they?
Pardon?
They were very happy to go along with that.
Yeah. I think Pete was the one that understood it. Pete Townsend understood it more than the others. I think Roger was always a bit sort of defensive because he was basically a rocker and didn't want much to do with it. Keith Moon was basically a sort of Beach Boys fan, and John Entwistle was a serious sort of tax collector and a trumpet player or some brass instruments.
Yeah.
But Pete, because of his art school background, understood all about image and style and everything, and I think he had some mod acquaintances. So he was up for it. And Peter bought them these boxing boots and cycling jackets and a zoot suit for Roger. And then they met with Guy Stevens, and Guy Stevens, it wouldn't have been cassette tapes in those days, but he made up a tape of like records he thought they should listen to. Like James Brown and stuff on Sue Records. And he was a real important figure in the whole thing. And so they started to build music based on these influences. And Pete obviously got to know the mods in such a way that he became, he articulated their feelings in those early songs.
And he also wrote both the A and B side, didn't he, of the first single? Was it I'm the Face and Zoot Suit?
Gave them their start by...
I know, it just seems amazing, really, now that they would have accepted that too, that the manager actually wrote the song, the lyrics, everything, and they went along with it. But, I mean, they were just desperate for some kind of recognition, weren't they?
That's right. Yeah, he found a couple of records out of Guy Stevens' collection. And
this is it.
Yeah, and just nicked the chord sequences.
It's got love if you want it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It becomes I'm the Face. It's absolutely...
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
It's the same record.
It's that whole association with R&B. I do think it's really interesting that, that still, you can probably go and buy a poster that says The Who Maximum R&B with the arrow on it. Well, that's all Peter Meaden, isn't it? Guy Stevens, isn't it?
That's slightly later because
is it? Okay.
Peter was involved for such a short time. You're like, 2 weeks later, it's a whole different scene. But I think, Richard Barnes says, it was Roger Daltrey, I think, who said to me, like, basically, Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp basically took Peter Meaden's ideas and they just sort of stretched them into the future.
Right.
Yes, they took the Who off him, didn't they? I mean, and gave him, I suppose, quite a lot of money, 500 quid or whatever. But I mean, was that reasonably amicable? That them?
I think. It was a sizable. Well, it wasn't sizable, but it was. I think it was at a time my dad was probably getting 20 quid a week. So not like. Now it would be nothing, but it was sizable. But he didn't really. He had no management contract or anything like that. So I think they were doing the decent thing at the time. And I think Pete Townsend kind of made up for it in future years when Peter came to manage the Steve Gibbons band and all that. He gave him a place in the Who's office with Bill Kirbishley and everything like that. And I think they made amends.
So in doing this book, you presumably were chasing down people for their memories of something that happened 60 years ago or whatever. Was it who were the most important people you found and talked to for this? People like Lionel Blake, who managed the Scene Club. I don't think he had any financial investment in it. He's since passed away, but it's people like that the general public wouldn't know their names, but they were important in that. Lionel Blake could remember Peter coming down and talking to him about mod and enthusing him and saying, this is before the Scene Club had any sort of identity as such, because it was the entrepreneur behind it was Ronan O'Rahilly. Yeah.
O'Rahilly, am I saying it right? Yeah. Who had Radio Caroline. So Lionel was enthused by Peter Meaden's sort of idea that it could have this mod identity. And of course, eventually became the place that Ready, Steady, Go linked up with quite closely.
Got its dancers from.
The dancers came from there, didn't they?
Behind their dancers, they would take, like, can't remember if Tina Turner went there, but Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley, people like that, they would bring down to the Scene Club after they'd done their into the Ready, Steady, Go.
I love all these references to bits of London throughout it. I was intrigued by the fact that that, as you say, Peter Meaden was born in Edmonton, and I think his parents moved back there, didn't they? Years later or something. And so he takes Chuck Berry to his mum and dad's place in Edmonton in 1965, when Chuck Berry has just played the Edmonton Regal, was it called? I think it was called.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. I wish there was a photograph or something of that. But his brother Gerald, who was a couple of years younger than Peter, told me that Peter told him to stay up in his bedroom. He didn't want him to come down.
When Chuck was coming round.
Yeah.
Don't show you.
So I think, when they did Quadrophenia, they did this image of a row of terraced houses that the typical mod would live in. And that's pretty much where Peter lived, in a house like that. Because I went to Peter's funeral, and afterwards we went back for tea and sandwiches and all that. And I thought, I don't think his parents kind of knew what had happened. It was.
You see, my theory is that all rock stars. I know he wasn't strictly a rock star, but he belonged in that kind of company. They all come from houses like that.
Yeah,
they all come from kind of anonymous, lower middle class, very often.
Like Elton John's, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
That wonderful series of pictures of people with their parents in suburbia.
It's their whole life is an effort to get away from that.
Yeah.
To transcend that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks at some part of the interview about sort of married middle class London. This is the thing he's trying to escape from, and he wants excitement. And that's basically what he was chasing all the time,
And always goes to the Scene Club, doesn't he, on Friday nights, and then doesn't get back till Sunday afternoons or whatever. Absolutely amazing. 48 hours.
He kind of explains to me in great detail, like how a typical weekend would unroll. It'd start with the green room at the Ready, Steady, Go.
There you go.
Saturday afternoon, you'd buy a scarf or a tie or something on Shaftesbury Avenue, and you have a cider at such and such a pub. But it's all kind of mapped out.
I was intrigued by the fact that I think you'd say that a lot of the mod, the key faces of the original mod scene, didn't really know much about each other. Go on.
They only knew people by their a first name or a nickname. So I was talking to a girl that would dance down there, and I said, "Do you know Peter Meaden?" And she'd say, "No, I don't know." I think I showed her a photo, and then she did recognise him. But they didn't know name, surname, where they came from, if they had parents or anything like that.
Yeah, it was just Terry or whatever.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. I'm also intrigued by the woman who was the one of the early DJs at Tell us that story.
Is that Sandra Blackstone?
Pardon?
Yes. Is that Sandra Blackstone? That's an amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't find out. Peter talked about her in the interview. I don't think he named her. He couldn't remember her name. And the name Sandra emerged from somewhere. And then when I was talking to Lionel Blake, he said Sandra Blackstone. And I found her former husband living in Florida, and he didn't know anything about this story, that she'd ended up as a sort of renowned, within a small circle DJ. He admitted it must be her, but he knew nothing of this background. And Cyril Blackstone, the woman, the man she married, is a brother of
Don Black.
What's his name? Black, the songwriter.
Don Black, the lyricist.
Yeah,
Don Black.
Yeah, he wrote the Bond themes. Yeah.
Yeah. So she came from Portsmouth or somewhere like that, and had come to London and seemed to have got involved in those sort of clubs in Wardour Street and eventually playing records at the Scene Club. But she knew a lot of black GIs, and they were a great supply source for these rare records from New Orleans or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she became influential along with Guy Stevens. They were the kind of two people that were playing there.
Yeah. And had a baby and just...
relation of hers, and managed to include some photos of her in the book.
Yeah.
But she just disappeared, didn't she?
Yeah, I can find no trace of her.
I just thought it was absolutely a fantastic story. That swing in London, these key figures in what we now call swing in London could be so, floodlit for about 6 months and then just disappear.
Nobody, I mean, Cyril Blackstone didn't know where she'd gone. She's got a daughter that she had with Cyril. No idea. Nobody seems to have any idea.
Absolutely extraordinary.
Dave and I were talking about this the other day. It was so interesting that the people who were mods, I mean, the people who are hippies or punks or whatever can be hippies, and then they can go off and start some other life. They can just talk about the time they were a hippie. But people who were mods, it tended to be through them like a stick of rock. It was a really important part of their identity. If you think of people like Eric Clapton and Robert Plant and obviously Pete Townsend, there's something about the attitude and the values about being a mod, which are something that people could never shake off, and it shaped their personalities forever. Would you say that was true? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at, Bowie would be a typical example.
Bowie, really good example.
And, I can remember from my sort of limited experience, it was sort of exciting to be on what you thought was the edge of something or other. And it was quite daunting, the fact that your jacket might be out of fashion in 2 weeks' time. But it was also quite exciting because, you might find another jacket that will be ahead of the time.
Yes.
It seemed to be on the cutting edge, which is why I can't quite understand like a mod revival, because it seems a contradiction in terms. But, Bowie's constant sort of reinvention thing seems to be based on that. In fact, I think I have a quote by him in the book where he more or less says that. And I asked Peter during the interview, like, what are mods doing now? And he basically said they're probably into like some sort of business and some sort of entrepreneurial enterprise, which is right. I mean, Mickey Tenner, who was a key dancer at the Scene Club, I mean, he runs some sort of fishing operation in Australia or Tasmania, I think it is. Yeah. They're enterprising people. They've gone on to do things like that.
Yeah.
If they're alive.
But, talk about the mod revival. I mean, I know the book doesn't really cover this, but it is interesting how it's, nobody talks about TEDs anymore, do they? You know, but mods. Yeah, everybody understands what mod means. Still, 60 years later, why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed there was a kind of mod influence in the 60s when I think of magazine design, which you've obviously all thought about. But that mod era of mod design still feels contemporary to me.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of young people see it as feeling contemporary as well.
Right. But
I mean, the only sort of TED revival I remember was like in sort of 71 or 72. I remember when they had that big bash at Wembley Stadium.
The Wembleys, yes. Yeah.
And they had your kind of revival TEDs with leather jackets.
Yeah. I was so interested by the fact that Peter had achieved so much and yet seemed in some ways very, very chaotic and slightly hopeless. You know, tell us a story about him trying to bring Captain Beefheart and this magic band over. Yes. I mean, that was just an amazing,
doesn't it?
Extraordinary event.
I think once he lost the Who, and there was a lot of regret about having lost the Who, and then he tried to find somebody that would replace the Who. And his best shot was really Jimmy James and the Vagabonds.
Yeah.
Jimmy James, who's recently passed away.
Oh, has he?
And again, it was a band that the mods really liked and were playing the R&B songs that chosen by Guy Stevens and Peter Meaden. But I think once he took acid in 67, that he seemed to sort of fragment in some ways. And sort of loss of direction. And besides being, incapable of sort of keeping a job down.
But then he brought Beefheart over, and it was a catastrophe, wasn't it? Got as far as Heathrow.
Well, that's right. He hadn't arranged for any permits and work permits and things like that. And the customs people or whoever it was, immigration were saying, they're going to be working here, and he said, "Oh no, they're not working here." And
I was very impressed. You managed to get
listening.
You managed to get all that stuff from the immigration records, did you?
Well, they turned up in some magazine at some point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Google, isn't it? You just keep going.
But also, he'd said that they weren't working, and then I think one of them just came up with a copy of the Melody Maker or something, which had an enormous advert for Captain Beefheart playing, I don't know, the marquee or something.
Yeah.
But I thought bang to rights, really. And then they just put on a plane and sent back to America.
I think they went to France or something.
I think
they went to France, that's right. They went to France.
They're filmed on the beach, aren't they? At the
Cannes.
That's right, the Cannes Festival. Oh, yes, playing Diddy Wah Diddy or something. That's right.
Wasn't Ry Cooder in that lineup?
I think he was.
Yeah. I think he was. And I was just thought absolutely amazing. So this kind of chancer from Edmonton is inspired enough to realise, I like Captain Beefheart, the Magic Band. They are the future of music. I'm going to get these guys all the way from California, which, let's not forget, this is the late 60s. This is not easy to do. There's no SkyTrain. There's nothing like that. And then gets them to Heathrow, but doesn't have the permits, can't get them through the immigration. Extraordinary. I thought there were many occasions in this book, and I really enjoyed it, where I thought, God, you can make a film about this bit.
Yes.
You can make a film about this weekend. It'd tell you so much about what life was like and how fast the changes were in those days, because also the other thing about modern that your book helped serve to remind me of is it's kind of pre-Beatles, isn't it?
Its origins, yeah. I mean, the earliest stuff I could find was about 58. Somebody had written a piece saying, "Are you a trad or a mod?" They actually used the word mod to mean the person rather than the music.
Yeah,
that's 58. But as you know, you think if it happened now, we'd all be down there with our cameras and it would be online and it'd all be over,
Well, you don't have those kind of things anymore. They don't exist.
Not in that way, no.
There are no scenes anymore because they're all online. There's no, you've got to go to this place on this night.
No, because those scenes were all geographical scenes.
Of course they were.
They were, you had to go to this club, the Scene Club or whatever, and you had to be there listening to this type of music at this moment with these people. That's what constituted the scene.
One of the newspaper articles was describing Cy Laurie's club, and that was a trad club, and people wore sort of chunky sweaters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Cy Laurie's club was where the scene club ended up. There's a sort of continuity between the origins of some of these.
Oh, it very often happens, doesn't it? Yeah. I tell you, the other thing that struck me is how young they were.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a record of a drug raid on the scene club in '64, and it actually gave the breakdown of the ages of the people there, which was interesting because I think the average guy was something like 17 or 18, the average girl was 15 or 16. And Peter Meaden at that time was like 22. So he's really kind of the old man of the scene, you know?
Right. I suppose it's pre-higher it's pre the extension of higher education, isn't it, really? You know, so people are leaving school at 15 and they're going to work at Selfridges or whatever.
Yeah.
I think
Peter did a little bit of art college, but it was the same boat, yeah.
Something else I'd never realised, I think, was when you talk about, there's a little bit about sex and how sex was not a big part of the whole mod concept, which I suppose I'd never really realised because it was a big part of the hippie thing. But I mean, you were saying that blokes didn't want to get into this whole thing of trying to pull girls in clubs because it took away their kind of independence and it took away this that introduced an element of competition. You know, I've got to kind of outcompete this guy. And also girls, I think a lot of it was to do with the drugs you were taking, just didn't make you necessarily want to go in that direction.
That's right, yeah. I mean, that's rather from Peter's perspective. The things he said to me, he seemed to, he felt if you got involved with a woman, you were kind of entangled and then they would stop you wanting to go out. And
it's all about independence, isn't it? It's right.
Yeah.
It would then be compromised by being in a relationship.
And if you see photographs of them dancing at the scene, they're all dancing sort of individually.
Yes.
You might be dancing with a girl, but it's like 3 or 4 people. The handbags, you know.
Yeah. No, it's an extraordinary story. So presumably you've been wanting to write this for a long time.
Yeah, I've had the idea for, I mean, like over 20 years. I thought, my basic instinct was I'd like this interview preserved in some way. I want it in the British Library, and I don't want it to get lost. And then I was partly inspired by the book Jan Wenner did with John Lennon, that Lennon Remembers, in a style which was like a Q&A interview, and then you had photos of what the subject was talking about on the other side, so maybe B.B. King or Yoko or the Stones or whatever in Lennon Remembers. So I liked that style. And then I thought, Peter didn't tell me everything about himself. There's all this sort of backstory of how he grew up that he didn't really talk about. And so I did this. Book starts with a mini biography of Peter. Then you've got the meat of the sandwich, which is the interview with Peter. And then at the end, my kind of personal reflections on knowing Peter and my own sort of limited experience of mod in the 60s.
Yeah.
But presumably you partly wrote it because you wanted him to get some kind of recognition because he's just not that well known, is he?
No.
And he was extremely influential.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, Jack Good, the TV director, coming to me and saying he wanted to do a book with me and something his grandchildren would be pleased with and all that. I tried loads of publishers and nobody was interested, like, who's Jack Good? And he was far more prominent in a way than Peter Meaden. So imagine the problems you have with Peter Meaden. Fortunately, Mark Neater at Red Planet just loved it. So that's how it got published, really.
What ended mod the first time round, as it were? I mean, not that it completely fizzled out. But what was the main thing that caused it to all close down?
I think LSD was one thing.
Yeah, I suppose so.
The other thing was clubs opening up, like, I don't know, Sibylla's or whatever, these sort of rather more glamorous clubs that the Beatles used to go to.
Yes.
But supplanted the basement clubs off Piccadilly. And I think there was a heavy police presence. They would try and close these clubs down. And there were all sorts of payoffs going on in the background. And Lionel Blake, in fact, took the fall for the Scene Club and got put in prison.
God. Yes,
for,
he did.
running a rowdy house or whatever.
Yeah. And of course, all like every other part of Soho now, it's full of chic hotels and so forth, isn't it?
Bijou hotels.
There's the Ham Yard Hotel I noticed when I was looking on the map. Yes.
Yeah, because Soho was a sort of byword for sleaze and and had been for years, but it's not quite the same place now as it was then.
No,
and it seemed like even when I first came to London, it seemed like a sort of semi-dangerous activity to go into Soho.
Oh my God, it was.
It was.
Well, there were open brothels and so forth.
Yeah, oh God.
Even in the late 70s. And then and then in the 80s, probably the 80s and the 90s were the best time for Soho, actually, because it was it was less dangerous, but nothing like as all the tea bars have all gone now. They've all been turned into kind of chic upmarket restaurants and so.
Yeah, we both worked in Carnaby Street when we were working on Smash Hits, and it was totally different, wasn't it? There'd be primary schools there between kind of two knocking shops.
But there's still
red lights.
I think there still is a primary school down Great Windmill Street, isn't there? I think there is one.
Maybe it is, but it was right next door to some.
When you go down there.
Yeah.
So where Ham Yard is there on the right.
That's right.
On the left is the road where the Musicians Union, the street where the Musicians Union headquarters used to be, and where all the jazz musicians used to hang about to get hired. I can't remember the name of the street. And you still hear over these high railings, you hear the squealing of small children having playtime. You're thinking, surely this shouldn't be going on here.
I know. It's bizarre.
Near these dens of sin and iniquity.
I was a latecomer to Carnaby Street, 65, but I remember, there used to be a pipe shop somewhere in the middle there.
It was still there in the 80s, in DeWitt's. Well, it was still there when I smoked, which was a long time ago. I used to go and buy cigarettes in Indewicks, and it went to sometime in the last 20 years or whatever.
But you talk about mod revivalism. An interesting thing is I knew Neil Spencer from days in Northampton in the mid-'60s. I met Neil, and then he did poetry readings and I did poetry readings. So he's been a sort of figure in the background. And then when he became editor of NME in 78 or 79, whenever it was, showed him the Peter Meaden interview, and he ran quite a chunky bit of it in NME. And I believe that was played a role in the sort of mod revival thing.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. What year did that run then?
It was either 78 or 79, something like that.
That would have been the time, exactly.
Yeah.
Merton Parker's, chords, etc.
Yeah, because the quote about clean living under difficult circumstances, which came in the interview, that got picked up by a lot of people and got used as an album title and on T-shirts and everything.
Yeah. Well, Paul Weller has a lot to thank you for. There you are.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary how these things just take years to kind of emerge, doesn't it, really? You know what I mean?
You mean the background to the thing?
Well, the whole kind of, the whole story of mod just takes years to emerge.
Yeah. It's fortunate for us writers, isn't it? Because
it is.
You go in at this sort of granular level trying to understand a period, and you're not in a race because somebody else is also doing a book on the same subject, and you can sort of take your time. And the people that are still around, they're normally pretty happy to talk to.
Well, only too keen to talk, because it's often their last opportunity to get that story out.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic. Honestly, it really is
really good.
I really enjoyed it, and I very much like the way it's done. I like the way it's laid out. I like these big pictures. Because my thing that drives me mad about the use of pictures in books is very often they're too small for you to be able to see the detail that the caption is drawing your attention to. Whereas this you can see,
Yeah, and also your pictures run at precisely the moment in the text when you're talking about people. So if you're talking about Sandra Blackstone or whatever, you think, I'd like to see what she looked like. And there's a full-page picture of this girl,
That's right,
It's very good. So you don't have a little photo section that you've got to then turn to and try and find it.
Yeah, well, I wanted it to look and feel like the period. So you... when you open it, it kind of the aroma of mod in 64.
Yeah, no,
yes.
sure.
Yeah. Very
Sure.
good.
Well, look, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thanks. We shall plug it. Anybody watching, we're going to put a little discount code in the link at the end. And so if you want to buy a copy through the publishers, you can get it at a discount. It's a fantastic book. Thanks so much, Steve.
Highly recommended.
Mark.
Yeah.